Mom by Choice series. If you're new here, I'm Lindsay. I am a 37-year-old American living in Canada, and I am a single mom by choice to my daughter, Evelyn, who is 4.5 years old. We live in Toronto. I've done 2 other episodes in this series so far, and the links to the videos will be down in the description. In episode 1, I talked about why I chose to become a single mom by choice and answered the question, is it worth it? In the second episode, I talked about how I told people that I came upon this decision. I also included some book reviews. I reviewed some books that are good for children. My daughter's only 4.5, so I mostly reviewed books that are good for the younger set as well as her age and maybe a little bit older. And so in this episode, I want to get down to the basics and talk about how I got pregnant. First, I want to say I got pregnant with the help of a known sperm donor. I used a website that is akin to Match.com. It links individuals who are looking to get pregnant or couples looking to get pregnant with sperm donors who are looking to donate. And so I cannot recall. I think I answered my donor's ad, or maybe he answered mine. I don't know. I'm a little fuzzy on those details. In any case, we emailed back and forth and we got to know each other a little bit that way. And then we met in person. We met in a coffee shop in downtown Toronto near where I worked at the time. And he hugged me and he gave me a big bear hug, and I knew in that moment that he was the one. Now, that's not to say that it was just that easy in finding him. I had to screen through a lot of men who were looking to donate sperm the natural way, which is I'm gay, and that is not something that I was willing to consider. And I also had to weed through men who just didn't fit. So just, I followed my gut. I listened to my gut, and a lot of the guys I just didn't feel a connection with, so they didn't get too far. So when I knew that I wanted to conceive, and I was getting ready, my finances were in order, my life was in order, or as in order as it was gonna be. Once I knew that, I started really tracking my cycles. So I downloaded an app on my phone that would tell me when I was about to ovulate. And once I got some months scheduled into that app and my cycle was a little bit more predictable, I started peeing on ovulation tests. Now, I will put links to everything in the description so you folks can find it easily. You can know which brands I use and trust, and the ones that work for me, and the ones that I recommend. So anyway, I started peeing on the ovulation test just to confirm what my Flow app was telling me, and so that way I always knew when I was ovulating. Now, an issue that I ran into was that my luteal phase was short, which meant that between the time that I ovulated and the time that my period came, there were not enough days in between those 2 events in my cycle. So I had to lengthen my luteal phase. There are ways that I did that naturally, and then eventually I had to move on to using Clomid, and once I confirmed my pregnancy, I had to use progesterone for the first 12 weeks to maintain that pregnancy. The Clomid helped me lengthen my luteal phase, and the progesterone made sure that my pregnancy stayed viable until my placenta took over the progesterone production. That's technical stuff. I don't know if you guys are interested in that level of detail, but I thought I'd throw it in there for those of you who are curious and may have the same issues. So you ideally want to see a 28-day cycle, but every body is different, and so I just knew when my cycles were 21 to 23 days long, that was not long enough to sustain a pregnancy. I was getting my period before an embryo even really had a chance to implant and settle in for the long haul. So I needed the help of medicine to keep my pregnancy viable. But in any case, in order to get there, once I had my donor selected and we had agreed, and he knew my cycle, I would give him a heads up about the ballpark of when I would need him to come over. He fortunately lived in the same city that I did when I was trying to conceive, so it was easy. I think he lived across town, but he always made himself available. I also know a lot of single moms by choice who chose to purchase sperm. Either they didn't know somebody who was offering it, or they weren't comfortable going the known donor route for different reasons, and so they used a sperm bank to purchase sperm. Now, I think some sperm banks allow you to do home inseminations when you purchase the sperm, but that's not something that I really ever investigated much, because I knew that I always knew that I wanted to work with a known donor. I wanted my child to be able to have that presence in his or her life throughout their childhood, and not just when they turned 18. No judgment on anybody's choices, that was just what felt right to me, for my family and my choice. And I'm really glad that I did it the way I did for my daughter. And I'll talk more about that in another episode, about how she's come to terms with her family structure, how she talks about her dad, how she views him, and how that's evolved over time. But that, again, that'll be a different video. So once I had my donor, once I knew that I was ovulating and it was confirmed with my app and with my ovulation stick, with the ovulation sticks, pro tip, just because I've done this so many times, pee on them not with your first morning urine, but with your 11 a.m. urine, and then again at 4 p.m. Because, and I wish I could remember the detail, something about the luteinizing hormone, it doesn't really show up until around 10 or 11 a.m. So you might miss your ovulation day if you pee on your ovulation stick at 7 a.m. when you first wake up, and you might miss the whole day. So it's best to do it at 11 a.m. and if it's looking like it's getting there but not quite, do it again at 4 p.m. And if you're not ovulating that day, then do it again the next day, but don't jump the gun and do it at 7 a.m. Again, try to do it at 11 and 4. For my queer contingent here, my lesbians, my queer people who are watching this video, you probably know what autostraddle.com is. It's basically a lesbian/queer website. Many moons ago, I wrote an article about how I got pregnant on that website, and the article is called Making Babies, How I Self-Inseminated, and you can too. So again, I'm going to put the link to that article in the description here, and you can click over and read that article of supplies you need if you want to take a look and make sure you have everything you need. And now, once upon a time, I had all the supplies that you need, but I don't anymore. I do have some old things on hand, but I'll go through the list, and those things that I actually don't have physically here anymore, I'll show a picture as we go along. Once you've got the sperm, or once you've got the guy, and unless I'm speaking only of home inseminations, I cannot speak to doctor's office, IUIs, or IVF. I'm only speaking of home inseminations today since that's how I got pregnant. I went to a medical supplies store, and I purchased a couple different things. I purchased sterile cups. Now, this is not one of the sterile cups that I purchased. This is actually a snack cup that my daughter uses. But you don't have to use a sterile cup. I just felt better about it. I purchased some cheap sterile cups. They're the ones that you'd pee in at your doctor's office. I would give one of those to my donor so that he could do what he needed to do in the bathroom with the sterile cup. He could put the lid on when he was done, keep it warm in his hand once he was done, and then hand the cup off to me. I would then hold the cup in my hand and keep it warm while I got my area all set up in my bedroom. Speaking of the area in your bedroom or wherever you want to get, you got to pick somewhere you want to get comfortable. For me, I always chose my bed so I could lie down. I stacked up pillows on my bed so that my hips could be elevated, and then I always had my iPad or my computer laying there, or a book, so that I would have something to read, because I always like to elevate my hips for a half hour or so. Sometimes if my donor would come over at night, I would just fall asleep with my hips elevated. More often than not, he'd come over in the late afternoon, and so I would just lie down for a little while and get cozy in my bed and have a little rest. Once I had what he gave me, his sperm, I would use a medicinal dropper. Now, you can get these at any drugstore. I bought them at the medical supply store simply because I was already there buying the cups. I don't know if you want me to show you with some liquid. Let me use some of my chai tea. Sperm. And there's no way a man will ever produce this much sperm. So, can you tell I'm a lesbian? It would usually be about this much, maybe a little bit less. And yeah, so once I had it in the syringe, I would just hold on to it again while I would lie down, and then in order to insert it, ensure it got as close to my cervix as I could, because when you're ovulating, your cervix is open so that the semen can make its way through and get the sperm to where it needs to go. So you get this as close to your cervix as you can without hitting it. I mean, it's not going to hurt if you hit your cervix, but you don't really need to be pressed right up against it, just close enough so that the semen and sperm can get where it needs to go. So once you've done that and you've inserted it, what I like to do was put in my Diva cup, and this would help me avoid any spillage. So I don't know if you guys actually need to see my actual Diva cup that I use. I'm just going to show you a picture so you don't have to, I won't put you guys through that looking at my Diva cup. So I like to use my Diva cup so that if there was any spillage, it would get caught in the cup, and I would leave that cup in for at least a few hours, mostly overnight, just in case, if there was spillage, it wouldn't really come out. You can also use soft cups or instead cups. They will serve the same purpose and keep the semen inside of you where it needs to be. So, let me just make sure I'm not missing anything. I'm just going to go through the article that I wrote. Oh, I am missing something. So before you insert the semen, If you have a healthy amount of cervical mucus, you don't need to do anything. But I often would purchase something called pre-seed, which is essentially a sperm or a semen / sperm friendly lubricant, and it would help the sperm swim to where it needs to go, essentially. So again, I'll put a link to the pre-seed stuff. Once I'd done my part and my hips were elevated and I had done the home insemination, I would just lay there. Every once in a while, one of my best friends would come over and visit me, and she would talk to me about the astrological projections of my future child should he or she be born 9 months from the time that I did the insemination. If you have a known donor, my recommendation is to do 2 to 4 inseminations each month. Now, you can do it on your day of ovulation, that's great, but I always like to do it a day before ovulation, day of ovulation, and day after ovulation. Sperm can typically live up to 3 days inside of you, so if you can only inseminate once, try to do it the day before you ovulate so that the sperm is already where it needs to be when your egg drops, because your egg only lives up to, I think, 12 to 24 hours once you've ovulated, but the sperm can live anywhere from 3 to 5 days. I'd err on the side of caution and just say 3 days. But if you can, and if you've got a known donor, make sure that he can come over a couple times that month, just to make sure that you've covered all your bases, because it's hard to pinpoint the exact time of ovulation. If you've inseminated, now what? You enter the dreaded 2-week wait, and anybody who has purposefully conceived can tell you how long those 2 weeks can feel. They can feel like the longest 2 weeks of your life. I was never able to wait the full 2 weeks until I peed on the pregnancy tests. I always did it 9 days after ovulation, and I know that's really early, but it was just what I did because I was so impatient. And when you're peeing on the home pregnancy test, make sure you're always using your first morning urine if you're testing 9 to 10 days post-ovulation, because your first morning urine will have the highest concentration of HCG. So make sure you're using that when if you're opting for the home pregnancy test. Once you're in the 2-week wait, you can do some symptom checking. I was maniacal about this stuff because I wanted to be pregnant so bad. I kept a journal every month where I listed my symptoms, 5 days post-ovulation, cramping, slight spotting, and that way I would kind of have an idea of what my body did after ovulation. And the month that I got pregnant, things were just totally different. Not physically really, but I remember sitting in a work meeting and I thought to myself, I feel different. And I think this was around 5 to 6 days post-ovulation, so probably when the embryo was first implanting. And I just thought, I think I'm pregnant. I just knew. I didn't have any physical symptoms at the time. I just felt like something in me had changed. But not everybody feels that, obviously, so I kept a track of my physical symptoms each month so that I would have a log and a record and show what my body would typically do. And so the month that I got pregnant, some of the symptoms that I had was around 6 to 7 days post-ovulation. I started to get a little bit of spotting, and that wasn't typical once I was on the Clomid. Once my luteal phase issue was corrected, I never spotted until it was time to have my period, so that was my first clue that the embryo was implanting. And then I would sometimes get hot flashes during the 2-week wait, towards in the second week, towards the end of the wait. I guess that was just hormonal fluctuations. And then towards the end, I want to say 14 days post-ovulation, my breast started to get tender, and that was another confirmation. But by then, I'd already peed on a stick. I got my first positive when I was 9 days post-ovulation, and it was very, very faint. And I remember I went over to my best friend's house. We were going to go for a walk after dinner. And I said, I can't remember exactly what I said, but I handed her this stick. I was just calm as ever. And she looked at me and she started to cry. And then I started to cry, and she's like, "Why aren't you more excited?" And I was just like, I am excited, but I'm cautiously optimistic, and I'm going to test tomorrow to make sure that it's the real thing. And she was like, "It is the real thing. This is the only positive you've had." But that's not actually true. Because I was so obsessive about taking home pregnancy tests, a couple months prior to this positive, the cycle that I actually got pregnant, I used one of the blue dye pregnancy tests. I think it was the clear blue pregnancy test. And sometimes those tests can give you false positives, particularly if you're looking at them after the 5-minute mark. But my false positive came up within a couple minutes. And I truly believe that I was pregnant, because why wouldn't you if a pregnancy test is telling you so? But it ended up being a faulty test. So I always warn against using the blue dye test, because they really can and do give false positives, not just to me. I Googled it like crazy afterwards, and it's a thing. So I always recommend using the first response, early response tests, or any of the red dye tests that you can find. Those ones are usually more, they're usually more reliable and accurate. So I think that's everything about getting pregnant with a home insemination that I have to say. If I've missed anything, please feel free to message me or leave me a comment and ask a question below. You can private message me if you feel more comfortable that way. I could even email you. I'm open to questions at any time. I really appreciate you people who are watching, and I've had some really good questions and some really good feedback on this series. I have a couple other questions in the queue that I will do videos on, so please don't hesitate to reach out to me in any way. Let me know what you like about this series. Let me know what you don't, what you'd like to see more of. I'm here. I plan on doing a 12-part series, and this is only part 3. So stick around if you will. Please like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to follow along. Sometimes I vlog with my girlfriend. I'm in a long-distance relationship now. She lives 1,400 miles away. So when we are together, we vlog. And I also vlog with my daughter, Evelyn. Just sometimes our out and about activities and things like that. So I want to say thank you very much. Of course, being a single mom by choice is very hard, but it's also incredible. And, you know, one of the things that I sort of felt sad about when I was trying to conceive was that I had my best friends who were there for me every step of the way, but I didn't have someone who was just as emotionally invested as I was. And I did feel a little bit sad about that some days, you know, that I was the only one obsessing over the pregnancy tests, and I was the one who did all the work to track my cycles and, you know, find a donor and all that. For the most part, I didn't mind doing these things, but every once in a while when I got hormonal, or when I'd get a negative pregnancy test, or when I'd get my period and feel really down and I just wanted a hug from somebody else who would feel the same sadness, that was sometimes hard for me. But again, I leaned on my friends heavily during this time, and finding a community for single moms is so important, so important. I could not do this without my best friend. Well, I suppose I could, but I'd be a lot more miserable. So find your people and stick with them through the process, the whole way from start to finish if you can. So again, there's a bug around here. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.